He would later say that nothing in his life had ever pointed him toward a moment like this one. Not the early morning spent walking over lonely fields, not the persistent whisper of curiosity that often pushed him back out when he was tired. Not even the simple companionship he shared with other detectorists, who knew that most days ended with nothing more than a pocket of old buttons or the faint satisfaction of a long walk. But on that particular morning in Dumfries and Galloway, when the ground was still firm and the sky a muted winter grey, Derek McLennan felt a quiet pull, the sort of impulse that is too gentle to call a sign, but impossible to ignore. The land around him held centuries like sediment, rolling farmland that had seen Roman legions, medieval monks, border raiders, and Norsemen whose names were lost long before ink touched parchment. Some places carry their history openly. Ruins, carved stones, earthworks that speak even to those who do not know how to listen. But other places hide their stories deep, letting the centuries layer over them until nothing remains but a faint atmospheric heaviness, a sense that time has passed here in a different way. Derek knew this feeling well. He had chased it on countless small journeys, letting it guide him to forgotten corners of the Scottish countryside. He had no reason to think this field was different. It was quiet farmland, the kind of place where the ordinary cycle of the year continued without interruption. But he liked the stillness. There was a steadiness to it. He wasn't searching for anything in particular that day. He wasn't following a rumour or a record. He was simply listening to the land in the way detectorists learn to listen, not just through the machine, but through a slow intuition that builds after years of chasing faint signals. He swept the detector in rhythmic arcs, the kind of motion that becomes almost meditative, letting the mind wander in slow, drifting loops. The machine hummed, chattered softly, then quieted again. Nothing unusual, nothing demanding attention. Just the normal small fragments of rural life. Foil, bits of farm tools, occasional pieces of scrap metal. The hours slipped by without aggression or urgency, and Derek settled into the familiar patience a search always required. Yet somewhere in that quiet space something shifted. Not a sudden revelation, not a blast of noise, but a clear, deliberate tone. A signal that did not stutter or falter. Detectorists know the difference between an everyday hit and something worthy of attention. The sound is cleaner, more confident. It carries weight, as though the past itself has reached up through the soil to tap lightly on the present. Derek paused. The air felt very still. He looked at the spot before him, a patch of unremarkable ground in an unremarkable field, but the tone had been unmistakable. He knelt and began to dig carefully, removing the top layer of earth with practiced precision. The soil lifted away easily, revealing nothing. At first, a few inches down, he brushed aside some loose dirt and caught sight of something pale and curved. At a glance, he knew it was not stone, not bone either. It had that soft, unmistakable sheen of metal. He lifted it gently, examining its decorated surface, a small ornate object with interlaced lines and deliberate craftsmanship. Viking-age, perhaps, or at least medieval. He wasn't sure, but the intricacy told him it was not some discarded fragment from recent centuries. A familiar, cautious excitement flickered through him. Detectorists do not leap to conclusions. They do not assume treasure. They move slowly, methodically, letting understanding arrive step by step. He widened the hole, brushing the soil aside in thin layers. Another object appeared, and another. A cross, a pin, a fragment of twisted silver. Each piece felt like a whisper from a long-dormant world. He stopped digging, aware now that he was touching something far larger than a handful of scattered items. The arrangement was too deliberate, the craftsmanship too rich. A hoard, perhaps. Something collected, concealed, buried with intention. He covered the opening carefully, heart beating with a quiet, growing certainty, and notified the authorities, not out of formality but out of respect, for the law, for the land, for the people whose hands had last touched these objects over a millennium ago. The next day the archaeologists arrived with equipment, recording tools, and the measured calm of people accustomed to balancing excitement with discipline. Derek stood to the side, watching as they exposed the site properly. He felt none of the impatience one might expect. Instead, there was relief. Relief that the story unfolding beneath the soil was now being handled by those trained to interpret it. They brushed away the loose earth and uncovered a compact cluster of precious items. Silver arm rings, ingot bars, decorative beads, a richly ornamented cross with intricate gold and enamel work. Each piece was lifted with reverence, wrapped carefully, and catalogued. It already looked significant. Yet within hours the archaeologists realized they were not done. Something about the density and arrangement suggested layers, as if the hoard had been assembled in stages. They extended the search, expanding the trench into a larger grid. Soil came away in controlled slices. Fingers brushed delicately through the darker earth beneath, and then, beneath the first grouping of objects, another layer emerged, gold this time. Small pieces at first, a filigree ornament, a finely worked pendant, hammered fragments decorated with patterns that had not seen sunlight since the Viking-age. But the pattern continued, repeating itself, object after object, each one more elaborate than the last. The team paused frequently, not because they were unsure, but because the magnitude required it. Hoards were not uncommon in the British Isles, but Viking hoards of this richness were rare, especially ones containing both silver and gold, arranged with such careful intent the trench deepened. More items appeared, arm rings, tassels, a delicately folded cross, its arms bent inward so it could be tucked away safely, a small hammered container that held yet more items inside. The archaeologists exchanged glances, not of disbelief, but of recognition. They knew they were standing over one of the most significant Viking-age finds in the region's history. Word spread quietly, contained until the site could be secured. A tent was erected. Specialists arrived from museums across Scotland. The air inside the enclosure took on a quality of hushed awe, as though everyone instinctively lowered their voices in respect. The hoard had grown to dozens of items, each one a window into a world of raiding, trading, migration, and spiritual complexity. Derek watched the process with steady composure. He felt the same quiet pull he had felt on the day of discovery, as if something had guided him not toward treasure, but toward a moment in which he became a bridge between centuries he had no illusions of ownership. Detectorists rarely do. They see themselves as part of the long chain of people who uncover, preserve, and pass stories forward. But nothing had prepared him for what came next. The metal container, once opened under controlled conditions, revealed a hidden sub-hoard, a collection of exquisitely crafted items wrapped in fragile layers of organic material, gold filigree brooches, a Carolingian vessel decorated with imagery foreign to Scottish soil, pendant chains, sleeves of finely worked metal that may have once adorned sacred objects. These pieces were not merely valuable, they were expressions of artistry, faith and hierarchy, items that travelled across kingdoms, carried symbolic weight, and were likely owned by people of high status. The hoard now contained over 100 objects, one of the richest ever found in Scotland, and one of the most significant Viking-age collections in the UK. Each new piece deepened the mystery. Who buried it? Why here, in this quiet stretch of land far from major settlements? Theories emerged. A wealthy cleric fleeing violence, a local leader storing tribute, a Norse raider hiding plunder after an expedition gone awry. None could be proven with certainty. Yet the scale of the find revealed something broader. Vikings in Scotland were not simply raiders. They were part of a vast and intricate network of cultural exchange. The hoard contained objects of Anglo-Saxon, Irish, Frisian and Carolingian origin. It suggested mobility, diplomacy and the blending of worlds. It hinted at alliances as much as conflict. The restoration process would take years. Each fragment would be cleaned, examined under magnification, its composition analysed. Patterns emerged, traces of gold working techniques unique to particular regions, stylistic features that spoke of distant workshops, and symbolic motifs that indicated religious significance. The hoard, piece by piece, built a story of the 9th and 10th centuries that was far more complex than the common narrative of raiders arriving on longships. When the discovery became public, it drew national attention. Museums prepared exhibits. Scholars began writing papers. The hoard was celebrated not only for its beauty, but for the way it expanded understanding of Scotland's early medieval world. And through it all, Derek remained grounded, carrying a quiet gratitude for the chance encounter that had altered the archaeological landscape of the country. He often reflected on how gently the moment had arrived. A single clean tone from his detector, a moment of curiosity, a kneeling figure brushing away soil, no lightning strike, no surge of fate. Just a man listening to the land, listening to a signal that had waited over 1,000 years for someone to hear it again. The hoard now rests in controlled museum environments, protected and studied by experts, its story still unfolding. Scholars will continue debating its origins for decades, perhaps centuries. Visitors will stand before its display cases and feel the same mixture of awe and quiet wonder that Derek felt that morning. And the land where it once lay has returned to its natural rhythms, the field as ordinary as it was before, except that now it hums with the faint resonance of history revealed. In the end, the Galloway Hoard is not only a treasure of gold and silver, it is a testament to chance, patience, and the enduring dialogue between the present and the deep past. It reminds us that history is not always written in stone or parchment. Sometimes it sleeps beneath the soil, waiting for the right person, at the right moment to find it. And when that moment comes, it changes everything, not through spectacle, but through a quiet signal in an empty field. A signal that bridges the gulf between centuries and gives forgotten hands a voice once more.